It's just turned 11:20 on my clock. So we're now looking at learning from deaths, and Megan, I think that's your item. We'll aim to be as succinct as we can and get back as closely to lunchtime as we can. So this is a receive and discuss note. Megan, is there anything you particularly want to draw attention to, or should I throw it open for discussion?
Just a couple of things, Chair, if I may. Oh, there's an echo. Okay, right. So just a couple of things. Firstly, to say that you will see in the paper that there were 81 mortalities that weren't reviewed within the 8 weeks schedule. These were mainly in AGM and gerontology, where staff were really completely immersed in caring for COVID-19 patients. This has already come down to 54, so they're working through it now, and we are also sort of being helped by any shielding staff. The other thing to say is that we have now appointed 3 more medical examiners, and our medical examiner system has resumed, which is great. And then also to outline in terms of learning 2 key things. One is the respiratory unit. So we moved from 7E to the cardiothoracic ward so that they had side rooms for the oxygen plus COVID patients, and they ran a respiratory failure rota, which was really excellent in the support they gave all other teams. And to say that there is work ongoing in JR2 stack to ensure that the respiratory patients are cared for in a side room environment, and that has been submitted for a capital bid. And the last thing I want to highlight is the reporting excellence item 4.8, which was also excellent, and it was noted and supported through the organisation. So I'm happy to stop there and take questions.
Are there any questions for Meghana? Okay, I mean, we've picked up a number of things, including the Chimmy and HFSR already in discussions further on. I think the board can take assurance from the fact that we have a systematic approach to mortality reviews, and it will be interesting to see how the medical examiner system helps once it's properly up and running, with a slight hiatus from COVID. So thank you very much, and thanks for being so succinct. That takes us to emergency preparedness. So this is the annual report, but I guess for me running through this, Sarah, is did our attempts to prepare help us with COVID, or did we end up sort of starting all over again? And it's a live test in one bit. We can see lots of other tests that we've done going through as well. But I think that's the key question of whether the learning from this is that we were doing the right sort of preparation and therefore continue with it, or whether it makes you think a bit again. So Sarah.
So thank you. I wasn't going to go into detail in the report because it's our annual report. What I have done is just made sure that we've got all of our live incidents that happened over the course of last year, some of which have been reported already to board. I think it does reflect on the level of preparedness and the depth of preparedness that we were ready for the pandemic. We have done a number, as the board members are aware of, desktop scenarios, including not only across our organisation but also across the wider BOB ICS colleagues and providers. So I think it does really lend itself. And right at the back you can see the initial hot debrief of the first 6 weeks, really, from divisional colleagues, corporate colleagues. So I think that learning does lend itself to really think through the level of preparedness, the level of the depth of that we need to rethink as emergency planners. And I think that will be taken away to the next the task force that we have across the system. But I'm happy to take questions. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I wonder if I could make one observation and one question. So the observation is, I'm not sure how fully it's really captured here, is we learnt a lot, did a lot of fantastic communication with the public around what they could expect coming into hospital and the like, and what I saw looked really good on that. So and linked with it a bit is whether we've adequately captured the sort of flow into the business as usual we want to keep of those sorts of things. And there was one particular thing I was a bit surprised was in the things that were noted that we'd done, but we weren't going to keep about flexible, devolved, accountable decision making, because I wondered whether we wanted to think a bit more about what we had learned about the ability to be agile, but without losing accountability in the system. So that appeared as one of the things that had happened, but it didn't look as though everyone wanted to keep onto it, and I wondered why it wasn't in that list.
No, absolutely. I think that was we do need to absolutely want to keep that devolved accountability and decision making. Do not want to have that rising up, as long as we, there's as we've said before, that when you're making changes, you talk about that to colleagues, so people are fully briefed and aware of what changes have been made. That empowering leaders and decision makers to take those decisions in the parameters that they have as leaders. But absolutely, so I'll make sure that that's added in. I think the business as usual elements, I think we're still working through some of the going back to the resume, reshaping, retaining work that we're doing around recovery. So I think we just need to look at that a bit further, and we're doing so.
Thank you. Katie.
Thanks, Chair. So great report. I just want to make a slight observation on 12.7, where it says the cause of the downtime was found to be with the supplier. As a statement, that worries me, because we don't devolve risk when we outsource. If there's been an issue, I prefer it to say what the issue was. And I know it goes on to say that actions have been taken and so on, but just as a statement around risk control, I don't like the fault was, not ours. I get that it wasn't ours, but I just think we need to stand up and be counted a bit more, that's all.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'll make sure that that's absolutely, we need to be clear, and thank you, Casey.
Thank you. So my computer's a bit slow. I've got Sarah Horden next, and then Eileen.
Thank you. Sarah, I'm sure it's covered somewhere, but on your chart of emergency planning, there's no box for terrorism. Is it something that's on our list of things that we think through if we were the subject of a major incident? Yes,
and they actually do we do preparedness training for that. So with the local resilience forum, which have the police, the fire, so they've got scenarios, and we do that as part of the whole of the preparedness. Absolutely, but make sure it's clearer on here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen.
So thank you, Chair. Sarah, I think it's a really thorough report, and I think it demonstrates how far the NHS in particular has come since the last first, should say, national attacks on the country, etc. So with this particular learning from emergency planning, I think is well embedded compared to 9 years ago. One thing, though, that I did want to reflect is that we might have some work to do in thinking through with teams how they don't see it as a negative, that things might change and decisions might change when we're in situ. So it is not unusual in an emerging incident for guidance to come either late or to come that requires us to reflect on what we've just put in place before. So I think just perhaps helping the staff to understand that the Plan, Do, Study, Act is actually extremely rapid in a live pandemic situation or a live incident. And it's just because it's referred to in the table around what didn't go so well. And I think it's perhaps a positive as much as a negative.
Yes, I think those quotes from staff. So I think you're absolutely right, and that's something we found going through the pandemic. And life changes very rapidly, as we found out, and we need to change. We need to change the way that we're thinking, the way that was. So, and it's how do we get that in? So I think that's a valuable point. Thank you.
So I think then we note the annual report and on emergency preparedness, which I think formally we need to approve as part of the board's assurance. We then move on to the public sector body website accessibility regulation. I fear that it's my reaction to public website accessibility and the uselessness of it for the purposes that I need about gov.uk is anything to go by that this could collapse into an unhelpful item. So I'm going to encourage us not to discuss this at great length. I think, Eileen, we're not quite sure about the timescale on dealing with things. But I would also like to suggest that the way we might move this forward as a group is to reflect on how we would get the balance between our needs as a body and visibility and accessibility for the public in relation to the IPR, because I don't want to lose my access to the detailed information. On the other hand, I can see that it might not be very accessible to people. So a way offline of discussing with, using that as a test case of keeping the necessary detail for us to do our job while also making it more intelligible to people outside. And I'd like to suggest that we might do that alongside the Council of Governors, because actually they have a different set of needs than we do. And if we found a space to do that, we could do some learning from that. So I'm going to discourage us discussing that unless you think it's a really bad idea and want to suggest me, and just get Eileen to take us through the sort of timelines and when we expect things to look different and in what sort of way. Eileen.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a really good suggestion. I think the spirit of the legislation is to make things more accessible for people, not to tie organisations up in bureaucracy trying to fix and introduce non-pragmatic solutions. I must say, for the record, apologies in the preparation of the paper. The transcription from the paper that went to TME resulted in the recommendations from TME going in here. At TME, we had a strong debate around what was pragmatic as well as what was realistically achievable. And the view of TME was that it is unrealistic to think that all board papers, given the complexity of the IPR and financial data, etc., would all be available for the 9th of September board, Chair. So apologies, because the section in the paper says that's what we're recommending. That's what we proposed to TME. But TME actually recommended that we would take through and adjust into the new format all of the narrative papers that are easily adjustable, so that we can demonstrate to our patients and public that we are taking this seriously and we are trying to anticipate and address the needs of the legislation. But at the same time, we would work towards the November board in working through the remaining papers for public consumption. So, as you've alluded, it is quite complex to translate some of the requirements that we have to manage and lead the organisation to make them match with the legislation requirements. I think the suggestion of working through that with our governors and our partners and taking some soundings through the people who will actually read the papers in public would be a really good approach. And perhaps offline, I might talk with Cecilia and yourself about how we could involve governors in that as a really good proxy for our public. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Is our proposal a satisfactory way forward to people? Okay, thank you very much. The next item is the Integrated Assurance Committee report, which is obviously mine as chair of that committee. So if it gets combative, Anne will take over the chair and protect me from all your criticisms. I know everybody around the board table is also part of this committee, and a lot of it is superseded by what comes through in the version of the IPR that we see at the board. So I just wanted to draw attention to a small number of things that we discussed that I think the board should note were underway. The first of those is the work on risk appetite. That is an important part of our assurance process, that we are reassessing our risk appetite, and that's not completed yet, but I think we should note as a board that's underway. The second is that we noted the apparently increasing value of the quarterly performance reviews. Each time we've heard about this, we've heard that they are being more helpful and more effective, and the IAC could take considerable assurance from that, including the fact that at IAC we have the divisional directors around the table with us, so we're able to get sort of 360 sense of what that feels like, which I think has felt very important. The third thing just to note is the discussion of the Patterson inquiry. I just note that because I think as we get more system working, understanding clinical governance across systems when people might be working across more than one organisation is going to become increasingly important. So that was one element of the Patterson inquiry that I think it's important that we put on the record that we've discussed. And the final thing was the way in which the transition around harm reviews has happened, and particularly picking up things by specialty and especially specialist surgery, all of which I think enabled the Integrated Assurance Committee to be assured that our governance processes were aimed to get to the bottom of what was going on and not being rolled on as systems, even when they didn't quite hit the buttons that we needed to be focused on. So that's my sense of the key issues that we looked at and want to bring to the board's attention. The performance issues, of course, have already come through in the IPR, and we've discussed those earlier, so I don't think I should rehearse them there. So that's the feedback to you from the IAC, and open to any questions. Anne, are you happy for me to take that as accepted? Nodding, great. We then move on to the TME, which it's important for us to have a sightline on TME, but it would be unlikely we have lots to discuss here that is not already on the agenda. Are there any questions for Bruno around the TME report? Bruno?
Can I make one point,
Yep.
Jonathan? Because the trust strategy and the clinical strategy is referenced in the report, and we agreed that we would update the trust strategy, taking some of the learnings from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it would be helpful to bring it back to the board. It's small changes, and it actually reinforces a lot of what we agreed, but it would be good to formally bring it back to the board at a future meeting.
Bruno, do you need that approved before it goes out, or can we receive it later on? So what's the timeline we need on that?
Eileen, I leave that up to you in terms of governance, what you feel is best.
Chair, may I suggest that we circulate it offline to board members and solicit any comments? We wouldn't want to hold up the launch unnecessarily, but I think it is material to us to consider the impact of COVID in relation to the year one aspects of the strategy, and therefore that allows us to be cognizant of any risks to delivery of the strategy in year one, as I wouldn't wish us to be further down the road in questioning that.
So Eileen, could we, for the record, then say it's Chair's action to authorise that to be issued, subject to any feedback from board members when it's circulated that suggests that we want a discussion of it first, and if we don't need a prior discussion before it's issued, then that can move ahead and we can reflect on it later on. If we do need a prior discussion, I suspect it shouldn't wait till the next scheduled meeting, because I don't think we'd want to hold it up, and we'll find a way of doing that.
Chair, I think Hannah has circulated it.
I've certainly had it. I didn't see the other list of people. So I think if we can agree that Neil will send an email around with a please could you let us know by, and we'll work out what that needs to be. If anything you feel needs discussing in advance of publication, and ideally then we'll get it issued and then we'll reflect on it at the next meeting rather than hold things up. Are you happy with that, Bruno?
Yeah, that's fine.
Good, thank you. Now that takes us to the National Impatient Survey, and that probably does deserve a little more time than we've just gone through the last couple of items. And Sam, I think that's yours.
Thank you. So I think just in brief, it's a good news story, as you can see from reading that. The improvements made are the overall areas that we've been really focusing on, such as pain management, and the results of these will be fed into the refreshed patient experience delivery plan, was what I was going to say, because I think the paper speaks to itself.
Thanks, Sam. There's one thing I just wanted to flag and see how we thought we might take it forward, and that's in relation to the experience of ethnic minority patients community. If I've understood the data correctly on the differential response rates, it's primarily the fact that what looks like an overrepresentation of white respondents is because of quite a high number of not knowns, as opposed to the whole thing suggesting a skew. But I wondered whether, in the light of what we know about COVID and Black Lives Matter, that we should have a bit of a think of how far can we drill down, and do we need to commission something specific about the experience of minority groups of our services, because we've got a bit of data on that, but it might be worth a closer look.
So you just reminded me, because I did actually write to mention that, and I think it would be easy to say that the respondents are representative of our overall population, but actually we do want to do a piece of work with Health Watch looking at difficult to reach groups as our maternity colleagues do. So I'll take that as an action.
Thank you. Claire, your hand went down again. Was that because you were raising a similar point? I'm going to take that as either she's lost connection or that was the case.
Sorry, yeah, it was the same point.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on the inpatient survey? It is reassuring things are moving in the right direction, and that mostly we're in the pack, and when we're not in the pack, almost entirely we're a bit ahead, and that's reassuring. But of course, we want to be loads ahead on all of it, so we're not going to be complacent about that. Thank you. That takes us to the safeguarding annual report. Sam, is there anything you need to draw attention to on that?
Maybe just a couple of bits. It's a statutory requirement that we bring the report in this form through to board, but I think having updates in the IPR actually keeps the board on track, that there won't be any surprises. Significant increases in both adults and children, and the board will see. Good assurance around our partnership working. And then just my final point, we're in the process of merging the adult and children's teams and making some investments into 2 lead posts. So that's when I say investments, as I look at my finance director, that's within, that's moving around individual vacancies from within the existing team. But we'll further strengthen the team with a lead for adults, a lead for children, as an overall trust lead, which I think the CQC will be very pleased with. But it's an assurance paper, essentially.
Thank you very much. And as you said, we do lots of this in partnership. So I think we should thank our partners for joint working, as well as thanking our staff for the work on this, which is particularly important probably at the moment, as we've exposed quite a lot of vulnerabilities over the last few months, and we'll need to make sure that we are able to respond to patients who need safeguarding. Claire.
I just had a quick question, which was, as we sort of work more as an ICS, are we beginning to look at sort of how we work with regard to safeguarding across that particular group?
So we tend to work, Claire, as part of Oxfordshire, and then the chairs of the adult safeguarding and children's safeguarding boards tend to get together and form a small executive committee. So at the moment, I think there's great partnership working across Oxfordshire with health, police, education, etc. And then the national learning comes down via the chairs of those boards. So it's an interesting point there.
Yeah, so I think there's something for us to take away, Sam, about the ICS, because at Oxfordshire level, the Health and Wellbeing Board receives reports. So there's a context where the different accountability structures come together. If it's needed at ICS, there might be a bit more that we can do, but it might not be needed at ICS level because the main partnerships will be in the county level. Sarah.
So through that, the COVID pandemic, through the Bob ICS incident meeting, they have identified through that increases of safeguarding issues. So that's just been the verbal updates, but so there is something more formal that I think that's required. So we have been seeing an increase of both adults and children. But I think as we've talked through, it'd be better to have something that we would have a more formal process across our Bob providers. Thank you.
So there's a sort of general theme here about the ICS, and we need to think about, and in many ways, if we could agree common reporting, so that actually we saw a common report across the ICS with our bit, we could help coordinate things. Sam.
So if I'll take that back to the chair of the boards, probably underestimating the amount of out-of-county work that is done. So there's lots of out-of-area strategy meetings that we have to attend. In addition, all of the county lines work is across the whole of the ICS. So maybe what's not captured in here for next time is out-of-county working. When I was in Birmingham, we tried to make this broader, but actually then we started to lose the themes of within the county. So But I think it's up for discussion, but the complexity of it and the capacity of the teams in post is pretty stretched now. So, but I'll take it back so that we can ensure that the learning from wider Bob, etc., is fed in.
Thanks very much, Sam. So Neil, we need to make sure that the minutes don't box Sam into anything specific then. What we've agreed is that it's a question and she's got the freedom to explore it and come back to us with whatever seems to be the appropriate response. Thank you. That I think then takes us on to the patient experience, PALs and complaints. Again, this is the annual report. Sam, anything you particularly want to flag up?
No, just a couple of brief points because we fully considered this at IAC last month, but this does need to come through to board. So discussed in full at IAC. I have a briefing to share with the chairman around different options for sharing patient stories next year, which I'll share today. I think there's just two other points. There's a lot of learning from COVID and the use of digital. So I think that's something that we'll weave into next year, and that's enabled patients to not only communicate with their loved ones in this country, but lots of international opportunities that we just never would have thought of before. The other thing, just reflecting this morning, is how we've managed visitors back onto the site, and that's been a really great piece of work where actually the public have received that very well, and we haven't had any complaints. And that's something that I think Sarah and I, the approach to that, Sarah and I would really need to look at as we look at the themes around delays and cancellations. So how we manage that, Sarah's team and my team together, and the messaging and the communication, I think will help members of the public understand as we try and resume and recover. So that's something that Sarah and I would like to take offline and put a programme of work around, because the joint working with Sarah's team and my team about people accessing site and being well communicated with, I think was a really good piece of work, Sarah, wasn't it?
That's an invitation to say yes, I'm assuming that. So are there questions?
I did say yes, but muted. Sorry.
Are there any questions or comments on the patient experience, PALs and complaints report? I mean, for me, this is all about us being assured that we triangulate and we follow things through, and the report does that for me, so I'm pleased to see that. Okay, that takes us to Meghana and the Responsible Officer's Annual Medical Appraisal Revalidation Annual Report, again coming for us for information and assurance. Meghana.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to draw out a couple of points, which is to say that the GMC suspended revalidation initially from March until September and now until March 2021. We have managed over the last year a 95.3%, 95.4% compliance with appraisal, which is very good, and our overall deferral rate is low. However, there is a challenge that we face, myself and my team, which is the number of prescribed connections could be as high as 1,800 during a year. So we have 1,553 prescribed connections of doctors, but another circa 200, 250 come and go, and everybody who's in the trust at any length of time needs to have an appraisal. But given that number is rising, our number of appraisers is reducing through retirements, through various other capacity issues. So that is a challenge we're having to manage. Other than that, the only other thing to highlight is a very successful Great Appraiser event that we held in February, where you spoke, Chair. We had 150 appraisers from the southeast of England attend, and this event is an annual event, which is very much appreciated by the region, as it were. So I will stop there and happy to take questions.
Are there any questions for Meghana on the RO Medical Appraisal and Revalidation Report? Thank you very much. Well done, Meghana. Got through without any questions. We then need to note the consultant appointments and signing of documents, which doesn't usually require any great discussion. Am I able to move on past that one as noting it? Thank you. I wasn't aware of any other business. Neil, are you aware of any other business?
No, nothing has been highlighted to me in advance.
Does anybody have any other business? Or are you happy to get 11 minutes of your lives that you weren't expecting back? Can I thank you very much for being so disciplined, particularly in that second session? I think we did discuss the things that needed to discuss, and the things that we just needed to note, we've noted in a very disciplined manner. So thank you very much. The next meeting of the board in public is scheduled for September the 9th. Given what we've committed to working at home whenever possible and risk mitigation, I think we should be prepared for that being a virtual meeting, and that would be the expectation. And I think we need to create a bit of space as a board to talk through what sort of meetings actually it really is useful to be face to face, and which sort actually this is a much more efficient way of doing the business. We will be restarting the planned FINA journey work, so we'll be able, I think, as part of that, to think about the best way of operating. So my inclination is that this feels quite efficient, and that we should expect to proceed with these efficient ways of working, provided we can crack the public visibility and accountability elements that go with it. And we'll need to have a bit of that discussion with our council of governors as well, as about how we best make sure that we meet their needs. And we'll have a bit of a chance to do that this afternoon. With that, I think we should, I guess formally we're passing a resolution to exclude the members of the public. Thank you, Cecilia, for observing. We will reconvene at 1 o'clock for the confidential business, and I look forward to seeing everybody then. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.